Very strange encounter on Mount Shasta. I've recently moved to Weed, California, small town next to Mount Shasta, for work. I'm an avid hiker and love exploring, so naturally 2 days ago I decided to go hike the mountain on one of my days off. Not entirely sure why, but I decided to drive my car very deep into the forest surrounding the base of the mountain, as far as the dirt road would allow me. It was around 3 p.m. with a clear sky, so I was very confident and enjoying the scenery as I got out of my car and started my hike, heading closer to the mountain. First, it was your regular everyday hike. Lots of birds and squirrels around. That smell of nature that fills your lungs as you walk across the terrain. It wasn't until I reached a small dried-up river that I noticed something was off. As I stopped to look at the dried-up river and take pictures, I noticed that it was strangely very, very quiet. No birds chirping, no signs of squirrels or other animals, and even the sound of the wind you hear when you're on a mountain seemed to be completely gone. At the time, I thought it was just an odd coincidence and started walking up alongside the river. But as I kept walking and being able to only hear my own footsteps, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Not the kind of feeling that makes you think someone is outside your window watching you. The kind of feeling that makes you feel multiple people or things are observing your every movement, studying you. I've never had that kind of feeling in my life, but what happened after made me completely forget about that feeling. I suddenly started to hear something out of nowhere that sounded like angelic humming, or maybe a song with no lyrics. But it also sounded strangely electric, like the sound telephone lines make. It wasn't very loud, but enough to make me look in the direction it was coming from. I looked to the other side of the dried-up river that had multiple trees and other foliage to see someone or something looking straight at me. It almost looked like a ghost, with it looking completely white. But this thing was very clearly there. It almost looked like it was wearing a robe, but I couldn't see any feet, hands, or even a face, although it had an oval head. However, I could feel it looking straight at me, almost as if it was trying to remember my every detail. Even from afar away, I could tell that its entire body had a very weird texture, almost like porcelain, but if porcelain was a silky fabric. It was very obviously not human. I was very understandably in complete shock and terror, frozen in place, kind of scared. We both looked at each other for what felt like forever, but it was most likely around 20-30 seconds. I very, very slowly started walking backwards. I don't think I took more than 2 steps when it tilted its head, as if it was curious or even surprised at what I was doing. All the while, I could still hear that electric angelic humming, and I swear it got a little louder when I took those steps back, when I turned my head to look behind me to make sure the way was clear so I could run. The song suddenly stopped, abruptly, without warning. This shocked me, and when I turned back to look at the thing, it was gone. No sign of it anywhere. As soon as I saw that it disappeared, I ran as fast as I could, following the path I took back. Even after it had disappeared, and while I was running, I could still feel like I was being watched from all sides. I almost tripped a few times in how fast I was going. When I got to my car, sounds of animals and the mountain wind suddenly came back, but I was still scared out of my mind and drove as fast as I could away from the mountain. I've never had anything paranormal happen to me in the past, and I've honestly always been very skeptical of stuff like that, but this experience has left me questioning a lot of things. I don't think I want to go back on that mountain. I've even had a nightmare about the experience. Not even sure what I saw or what to call it. Weird creature in South Carolina mountains. This took place last year at the beginning of summer. I was with my mom, headed down to my Nana's farm to visit for a weekend. For some context, she lives on a farm way back in the country, right at the foot of a mountain in rural SC. It's a very rural, secluded area, so the roads are badly maintained and barely wide enough for 2 cars to pass one another. The houses are also spread out and set far back into the tree line from the road, so there's very little ambient light besides the headlights of a car. So my mom and I are driving along, her in the driver's seat and me in passenger. It was around 11 p.m., and we're approximately 15 minutes out from Nana's, deep in the woods, with the radio down almost to silent. We come onto this straight stretch of the road in a heavily wooded area, and suddenly, this blur of a creature darts out across the road, right at the edge of our headlights. It was moving pretty good, but both me and my mom were able to get a good look at it, and both agree on what we saw. It was a fairly large creature, roughly the size of a person/bigger. Neither of us could make out the head, but we both remember it appearing to have a segmented body, my mom's words, as if it were emaciated and its ribcage was poking out. The reflection of light made it hard for me to tell color, but my mom said she remembered it to be dark, and she didn't see fur, hair. It had long limbs, and as it moved across the road, it didn't run the way a dog or horse would, with all 4 legs. The best word to describe it would be loping, using its front limbs to pull itself along, and it was moving considerably fast. We both said something along the lines of, "What the hell is that?" as it crossed in front of us. As we got up to where it had crossed, I turned to look at it just as it reached the other side of the road and out of our headlights, and I swear on my life, it stood up and ran. Not like a dog rearing on its hind legs. It was definitely bipedal. I immediately yelled that it had stood up, and we both started getting nervous. I honestly would have thought I was going insane had I not had another person in the car with me. My mom has always been a pretty level-headed person and not superstitious, but she was very nervous and made me agree to not tell my Nana about it to avoid scaring her, which made me recognize how serious this was. I should also mention that there had apparently been a series of attacks on livestock/horses in the area around the time this happened. People were saying they found wire fences ripped through and their animals attacked. I don't think any died, but if I remember correctly, there were a few horses that were severely wounded. There have been a few other strange instances in the area, but that was my personal experience. Something followed my friend up to the mountaintop. This didn't happen to me, but to a friend who went hiking to Mount Lawu in Java, Indonesia. Mount Lawu is considered a sacred place by the locals, and people believe it is one of, if not the most haunted mountain in Java. Many people have got lost up there, and some never been found. One case in particular, which I recall, is the disappearance of a young boy named Alvin, who went hiking up there with some of his friends on New Year's Eve a few years ago and vanished without a trace. The rescue party gave up after weeks of combing the slopes, trying to find him. He was last seen by other hikers near Pasar Dieng, or Pasar Setan, Dieng Market, or Devil's Market, an empty grassland near the top where many hikers have reported hearing mysterious disembodied voices, hence the name. A few years ago, my friend and 2 other hikers decided to climb the mountain. There are several marked trails by which to get to the top of Mount Lawu. The busiest one is Candiceto because it is one of the easier trails to pick, and the scenery up there is breathtaking. But the ascent takes longer. It is a footpath that gradually ascends through pine forests, grasslands, and whatnot. He and 2 rookie thru hikers took this trail. It was his first climb to the top of Mount Lawu. They had met on a hiker forum months before and decided to take the easier trail since the other 2 guys had never attempted a mountain of this caliber before. It wasn't one of those busy days when they arrived, and there were only a handful of other hikers around. Anyway, their trip went smoothly at first. Soon, they were joined by 2 other hikers from a nearby city, but after they broke through the thicket and passed through Pasar Dieng, my friend began to feel a little unease. And then he noticed something a little off with their hiking group. There were now 6 of them. Somebody else had joined them unnoticed. He looked around and stared at his fellow hikers one by one, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. They all looked familiar to him, which was confusing. He couldn't seem to recognize the odd one out, no matter how many times he counted and scrutinized their faces. And to make it even worse, he seemed to be the only one who had noticed this. He asked himself if he was becoming disoriented due to exhaustion or the cold. He started seeing glimpses of blurry silhouettes moving around them. He wanted to quit. He no longer felt excited about this hike. He didn't feel like he was going to make it another hour. but there was nothing he could do. They were already halfway to the top, and he was sure he would have no choice but to return alone if he decided to turn back. He had lost his bearings. He had no idea where he was or who he was with. When they finally reached the top, he collapsed in a heap. According to his friends, he then became delirious and started to speak of random, creepy things, like them being followed by something and someone watching them in the fog. He even told them to just leave him there because he was going to die anyway, and to let his parents know how much he missed and loved them. It took them a few hours to calm him down and for him to regain his strength, and they decided to set up camp for the night. But the other guys also could not sleep that night. They could feel a presence with them. When the first lights of day appeared in the sky, they quickly dismantled the tents and packed away and began their descent, which luckily only took a few hours down the slope until they made it safely to base camp. My friend had to be rushed to the hospital. Burning up with fever, he had made it through the night and down the mountain. Others like him weren't so lucky. Has anybody else ever experienced this other hiker phenomenon or something similar while climbing a mountain or trekking the wilderness?